A few months ago when I started really considering doing the stage 2 camshaft upgrade on my 23 Harley Davidson Lowrider S, I did what one might expect and I just went and watched as many install videos as I could find, really just to kind of see what the whole process entails, familiarize myself with the steps, and kind of make an evaluation on whether or not I felt like this was something I could tackle on my own. Now, I was particularly interested in doing the full cam chest kit upgrade with the 475 cam from S&S. It makes sense that the best way to figure that out would be to follow along with other people's installs and just kind of compare their level of experience or skill set with your own. However, in watching a lot of those other install videos, it did seem like a good amount of people, myself included, still had longing for more information as far as I'm only at so-and-so level of experience, I'm a beginner, what tools do I need? And so having gone through this myself now as a beginner and done it successfully, I figured I'd just take a couple of minutes to share some of my feedback points and things I would consider if I were to go through the process again, knowing what I know now. A lot of these may seem obvious, and frankly they are, but whether you take 10 seconds to consider these or a couple of days, I still think they're worth taking the time to consider. And just to begin with probably the most obvious question, of course, the first thing I would recommend asking yourself really is just, what is my level of mechanic skills? I have a history of working on dirt bikes and cars, but this is the first Harley I've ever owned or worked on. So I would probably label myself somewhere in that intermediate range. Another pretty baseline question is, do I have the shop space and the tools that are really going to be involved? Not really even just to complete the job successfully, but to actually enjoy doing it. The lack of tools or quality of tools can really make or break, the success and, like I said, the experience of a job. Another pretty prevalent concern I've seen people have and question to ask yourself is, do I have a warranty that I want to protect? From what I quickly gathered online, Harley is pretty strict on what you can do yourself as far as working on your own motorcycle without voiding your warranty. So it's kind of a trade-off everybody has to make based on their own circumstances and level of comfort. I personally was not super concerned about voiding my warranty or kind of giving up that protection. So it was something I felt like I was willing to trade for the experience of doing the job myself. And that segues us well into the next round of considerations: time, stress, to be honest, money, and experience. And this is probably what I found to be the most weighted part of the decision-making process. So when it comes to time, I think obviously that's very heavily influenced by what we talked about before of what is your level of skill. I really wanted to very purposely go slow to make sure I paid attention to detail and didn't make any major mistakes. Jumping ahead a little bit, I think it is relatively hard to catastrophically mess this job up. However, you don't want to get overconfident because errors can happen. I made a handful of my own even, and while it turned out okay, I would definitely recommend giving yourself the time to not be rushed, and having the time to slow down and be able to enjoy it is a huge part of why we do this with our motorcycles, right? So thinking of stress as a consideration, it's worth asking yourself, because stress, time, money, they're all pretty big variables. So what is going to be a better experience for you overall? Would you rather pay a shop to do this and not have to worry about taking on that stress yourself? What is the primary objective? Is it to have the experience of doing the install, to learn, to save money, right? So it's all just a huge combination of that. The only other standout when it comes to the money aspect of this question is doing a camshaft install does require a few different specialty tools for pulling and pressing your camshaft bearing, as well as measuring your crankshaft runout. Those tools are not cheap, to be honest. They were probably $600 just for those two tools alone. And for myself, I don't have multiple bikes that I'm gonna work on. I just wanted the experience of doing this install for the fun of it. And so I chose to purchase the tools knowing that they were most likely going to be a single instant use. So that's a pretty significant price to pay for something you're only going to use the one time. I do plan on selling those tools now that I don't need them anymore, but who knows how well that process will or won't go. So it is a pretty major consideration at that price point. Another question that's really worth kind of checking in with yourself on is, do you have help you can lean on if you run into some snags? Do you have any buddies or family members that are equally, if not better, mechanics than yourself and can help get you out of a bind if you're stuck or want a second opinion on something? Or a lot of times just having that kind of peace of mind from having a second set of eyes goes a long way. And that certainly came into play multitude of times during my install. So likely you're doing that pretty subconsciously or collectively without needing to go through those item by item. So one of the things that I wish I would have done a little bit more of in hindsight is research on my specific bike. There were a couple of small things that I didn't know until I actually got in there. Really the biggest one was the fact that it looks like Harley actually upgraded the camshaft bearing. The install videos that I had been watching were probably on 17, 18, 19, even 20 models of the Lowrider S. And so a lot of people talked about the S&S cam bearing being a superior component because it had additional grooves in it and it was worth doing the bearing swap when you did the full cam upgrade. So naturally I went that route. It came with the kit anyway, but as it turns out, once I pulled the stock bearing and actually had the two side by side, they were literally identical. So if the bearing's the same, I personally did this upgrade when my bike only had like 3,200 miles on it, so it's close to brand new still. That would kind of be up to your own personal preference as to whether or not you would do the bearing swap. But at least if I had known that ahead of time, I would have been able to make that decision consciously, because as I already mentioned, one of the not insignificant price points of this whole process was buying the bearing specialty tool for, you know, $400 or something. I'm glad that I did it, but would I have done it if I had known it? I would have been pulling a relatively new bearing to just turn around and put the exact same bearing in again. I personally found the actual step-by-step portions of disassembling all of the stock components and doing the whole S&S cam chest kit assembly and installation not that difficult. And pay attention to detail, double check all your work. You're probably gonna be fine. The biggest thing that it highlighted for me is not so much am I smart enough to follow these instructions, but am I smart enough to think my way out of problems that I may get myself into? A couple of small things I didn't actually document on the camshaft install also occurred, like when I had been doing the push rod assembly, not even the push rod assembly, honestly, the freaking tube covers that go back on. I did 2 of them successfully, kind of started daydreaming, and when I did the third, I put the push rod covers on backwards on one instance and got them stuck. And I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. But it's a pain in the ass and kind of tricky to get off once I put it on the wrong way. It ended up not really being that difficult, but you know, you have a couple of the small moments where you're like, oh shit, how did I let myself make this mistake? And more importantly, how am I gonna get out of it now? So just kind of having the mechanical prowess, if you will, to think your way out of problems that you might either get yourself into or that just may occur for whatever reason is definitely something to not undervalue, I suppose. So to kind of cultivate that all together and just speak to the question plainly of, can a beginner do this job or should you? I would encourage most people to do it in most cases because, like I mentioned, I don't think that there's really a lot of ways that you can catastrophically mess this up as long as you just follow the instructions and take your time. A lot of people have talked about the quickie push rods needing adjustment after you do the install. You can go back and fine tweak things if you have to afterwards. So at the end of the day, it is up to everybody to make their own judgment call, and there is no right or wrong answer, but I would lend the encouragement or support to give it a try if you feel up for it. I would absolutely do it again, even including the set of circumstances that I ran into, having a bolt shear off on me through really no fault of my own, but if you want to see more of that, go check out the rest of the install I covered. There were some low moments, and I will be honest, there was a point where when I had to get my bike into a shop to help kind of get that whole issue resolved, I really considered just giving them the parts and saying, hey, will you just finish this for me? I don't want to pick up where I left off after how stressful it's been. But I'm really proud that I stuck with it and got it done at the end of the day. You know, it's not in like an egotistical way, but there is a sense of pride to be able to look at your motorcycle and think about all the things that you went through to get everything upgraded. And you know, that's half the reason why we get motorcycles, not just for the enjoyment of riding, but the experience of building them up how we want them to be. In that whole process, I learned a ton about engines and my bike. I gained new mechanic skills and just a good life experience. So once again, just to wrap it all up, at the end of the day, there's no right or wrong answer. It's totally up to you, but those are the things that I would just spend some time thinking about as you go about making your decision as far as whether or not you want to tackle a cam upgrade. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys have fun working on those bikes, ride safe, and I'll see you out there.